On a quiet evening in a suburban neighborhood, blue and red lights splashed across the pavement like a violent storm breaking into peace. A man in a crisp white coat stood frozen beside his sleek black car, his stethoscope still dangling around his neck. But instead of admiration for the doctor who had just finished a 12-hour shift saving lives, suspicion boiled in the eyes of the officer who stepped closer. The officer's hand hovered near his holster, his voice sharp, his accusations heavy. Within moments, the world turned upside down. The man who had dedicated his life to healing was suddenly branded a criminal, accused of stealing what was already his. And as neighbors peeked through blinds and cameras began to roll, a chilling question hung in the night air. How does a hero become a suspect simply because of the color of his skin? Dr. Marcus Hale was no ordinary man. At 38, he was a respected cardiologist at one of the largest hospitals in the city. His days stretched long into nights, filled with surgeries, emergencies, and the steady rhythm of saving lives. He drove a black 2021 Lexus, polished clean like the pride he carried for the work he did. To him, the car was more than a vehicle. It was a symbol of years of sacrifice, sleepless nights through medical school, and the determination to climb through doors often closed to men who looked like him. Marcus lived in an upper-middle-class suburb, a neighborhood dotted with manicured lawns, pastel houses, and streets so quiet they echoed footsteps at dusk. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved politely, but whispers sometimes lingered longer than smiles. He had moved there for his wife Lena and their 2 children, hoping the community's good schools and safety would shelter them from the harsher parts of the world. But Marcus always carried a shadow of awareness. Despite the titles before his name, despite the respect of patients and colleagues, he knew his skin carried a weight heavier than his white coat could hide. In restaurants, he noticed the occasional suspicious glance. In stores, the security guard's eyes often followed him just a bit too long. These small moments he brushed aside, convincing himself they were isolated. But on this particular night, after 12 grueling hours at the hospital, the truth would come crashing against him like a tidal wave. He parked his Lexus in front of his home, tired yet content. The hum of the engine died, and for a moment, silence returned to the neighborhood. But then came the flash of sirens. A police cruiser slowed, then stopped. An officer stepped out, eyes narrowing on Marcus as though he had stumbled upon a thief mid-crime. The air thickened with tension the moment the officer's boots touched the pavement. Marcus stood beside his car, pulling his hospital ID badge from his pocket, a reflex born from experience. The badge gleamed faintly in the headlights, but it wasn't enough. To the officer, the black man standing next to the luxury car wasn't a doctor returning home. He was a suspect waiting to be caught. The officer demanded proof of ownership. Marcus calmly explained it was his car, that he lived in the house just behind him. But words, no matter how clear, crumbled against suspicion hardened by prejudice. The officer circled the Lexus, running his fingers across its surface as though searching for fingerprints of a crime. Marcus's heart raced, not because he was guilty, but because he knew history. He knew names like George Floyd, Philando Castile, Sandra Bland. Lives ended when a simple stop escalated into something deadly. He reached slowly for his wallet, every movement deliberate, his doctor's instincts reminding him how quickly fear could trigger violence. He retrieved his driver's license, registration, and insurance card, placing them neatly on the hood. But the officer's eyes weren't on the documents. They were on Marcus's skin, on the expensive car, on the unspoken assumption that the 2 did not belong together. Within minutes, backup arrived. 2 more cruisers pulled in, their lights cutting through the quiet night. Neighbors emerged with cell phones in hand, whispers rising like a chorus. Children peeked from windows, their faces pressed to the glass. To them it looked like a crime scene. To Marcus, it felt like a stage where his dignity was stripped away under the spotlight of flashing lights. The officers huddled, murmuring suspicions. "Stolen vehicle," one said. "Doesn't match the profile," another added. Marcus's hands trembled, not out of guilt, but from the crushing weight of humiliation. Every second that passed, his identity as a doctor, a father, a neighbor was erased. In its place stood only the color of his skin, painted by stereotypes stronger than any fact he could present. They ordered him to place his hands behind his back. He hesitated, pleading for reason, for acknowledgement of the documents he had already provided. But reason drowned under prejudice. Cold steel tightened around his wrists. The stethoscope still hanging from his neck clinked against the metal cuffs. A cruel irony. A healer, shackled as a thief. Marcus's children, woken by the commotion, appeared at the doorway. Their small voices carried fear as they called for their father. He turned his head, meeting their wide, tear-filled eyes, and felt a pain deeper than the cuffs cutting into his skin. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the message etched into their young minds that no matter how hard his father worked, no matter how many lives he saved, his skin could make him a suspect in his own driveway. The night spiraled into chaos when Marcus was pushed against his car. The same hood where his documents lay untouched, ignored. Neighbors recorded from every angle, their phones capturing the cruel theater unfolding. The officers called in the vehicle as stolen, their voices sharp over the radio. Marcus's pulse thundered. He tried to steady his breathing, but the humiliation cut deeper with each passing second. He thought of the patient he had saved earlier that day, a man whose heart had stopped in the emergency room, revived by Marcus's steady hands. He thought of the oath he had taken to do no harm, to heal. Yet here he was, treated as harm itself, as danger, as crime. The officers tightened their grip, dragging him toward the cruiser. His body protested, but it wasn't resistance. It was disbelief. His voice cracked as he begged them to check again, to call the DMV, to verify. But their ears were closed. The narrative they had built was stronger than any fact he could present. And then, just as the cruiser door opened, a voice broke through the chaos. Lena, his wife, rushed out of the house clutching a folder of documents. Her voice carried desperation as she screamed for them to stop. She waved the car's purchase papers, the insurance in Marcus's name, the mortgage showing their address. Her hand shook, but her resolve was unyielding. The officers paused. One snatched the papers, scanning them under the harsh beam of his flashlight. Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. The truth unraveled, undeniable. The car was Marcus's. The doctor they had cuffed was no thief. But the damage had already been done. The cuffs had bruised his wrists. His children had watched their hero be paraded as a criminal. His neighbors had seen him pinned, humiliated, branded by suspicion. No papers could erase the scars etched that night. The officers removed the cuffs, muttering half-hearted apologies cloaked in justification. Just following procedure, they said. But procedure, Marcus knew, had never been neutral. Procedure had always bent beneath the weight of bias, crushing those it was meant to protect. He stood in silence, his dignity stripped, his trust shattered. Lena wrapped her arms around him, their children clinging to his legs. The officers retreated, their cruisers fading into the night, leaving behind only the echo of injustice. In the days that followed, the videos spread online. Outrage surged,
voices demanding accountability. The hospital where Marcus worked released a statement of support. Community leaders condemned the incident. Yet beneath the noise, Marcus carried a quiet wound. For all the recognition, all the support, nothing could erase the moment his identity as a doctor was erased by a glance, replaced by suspicion solely because of his skin color. At night, he replayed the scene in his mind. The flashing lights, the cold metal, the terrified eyes of his children. He wondered how many others lived the same story without cameras to bear witness, without neighbors to intervene, without documents to save them in time.
The Lexus still sat in his driveway, gleaming under the sun. But now when Marcus looked at it, he didn't see achievement. He saw the night his humanity was questioned. The night his skin weighed heavier than his white coat. The night his children learned a lesson he had hoped to shield them from. That safety is never guaranteed when prejudice writes the script. And so the question lingers, not just for Marcus, but for all who hear his story. What worth is success? What worth is respect when the world can still reduce a man to suspicion because of the color of his skin? What would you do if this happened to you?